1 minute. Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
And good morning to you. It's a glorious mid-September day in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, 2015. I mixed up because, it's the Jewish New Year now, and that's 5776. I got a 6 at the end of that one. Yesterday during the show, Celine, my producer, shoved a piece of paper over at me on which she had written Jack Kelly's column. Is that what you wrote? Right. And I looked at her and said, I don't know what that is, and I didn't read it. Well, and then I don't believe we said anything more about it. However, I don't know how I missed it. Well, I do know how I missed it. Jack Kelly's column appears in Sunday's Post-Gazette, and it is with such regularity maddening that I simply don't read it. If on a Sunday morning I want to get myself angry and upset, I'll read his column, but that's generally not what I want to do on a Sunday morning. So I have learned to avoid Jack Kelly's columns, which is how I avoided the last one. And I guess if this headline is correct, it was called Remnants of Slavery, White Guilt is Not Helping Black America. And if I were to have even glanced at that headline, which I don't recall doing, that would absolutely, I would have not going there. A lot of people did go there. They read it. And their Sunday mornings were ruined, which is the fate I avoided. Today, in the letters to the editor, there are 2 letters from people who obviously had their Sunday mornings ruined. And it was only after reading those that I went to see what he had in fact written. Now, let me say that this column is being condemned from sea to shining sea, given today's media, social media. It's all over the place, and people are outraged, not just in Pittsburgh, but in other places. I am not going to subject you to the entire column. It's just not worth doing. I can share with you a few wonderful tidbits from it. Here's one. The words slavery and benign ought never to appear in the same sentence, Jack Kelly wrote. But, he writes, Slaves in the American South and the British Caribbean usually were treated less harshly than in most other places where slavery has been practiced, especially in ancient times, Jack Kelly, the historian, assured us. He also wrote, slavery was horrible, but no black American living today has suffered from it. Now, I got to tell you, that one sentence shows such an extraordinary lack of comprehension, of understanding of the impact of African Americans whose ancestors were brought here in chains and enslaved. The impact on them didn't end with the Emancipation Proclamation. All you have to do is look at where our country is right now. And if you cannot trace that back to slavery, you're out of your cotton-picking mind. Cotton-picking, no pun intended. Stop it. He wasn't done, though. Slavery was horrible, but no black American living today has suffered from it. If you were able to pick yourself up off the floor and continue, the next sentence would have put you back on the floor. Most are better off than if their ancestors had remained in Africa. On what grounds do you make that statement? They should be happy they're living here? Look at Africa. I mean, the stupidity! It'd be better. I don't even know what to. I don't even know what to say. As somebody who, as I've mentioned more than once, has just rewatched Ken Burns' Civil War series. Anyone who knows our history knows that the descendants of the freed slaves were trapped and enslaved in a different system that was I don't know. The Jim Crow South, you want to live in that as a black? Do you want to live in it all the way up into this? Up into my lifetime. You want to live? I've often told the story of going down to Vidalia, Georgia on a story for WTAE television. And they sent a photographer with me, and he was black. Spencer Simon. Nicest guy you'd ever want to know. And I watched as we headed further in to Dixie how Spencer got nervous. I was oblivious. We checked into a motel. He was a wreck walking in with me. This would have been 1982, maybe. He said he wasn't sure if we should eat breakfast in the morning together. I said, we're getting up at the same time. We're on the same. I said, if you don't, we did. I don't think he enjoyed his breakfast. Spencer Simon was not a slave, far from it. He was removed by I don't know how many generations. He still had fear. He still felt, to a certain extent, terrorized as a black man in that piece of America. And after a while, being with him there, driving on country roads, we were not in the city. We were in the country. Driving around on country roads with him, I became a little nervous too. The fear of somehow being stopped by somebody. What? I don't comprehend. I mean, I'll agree with Kelly in this. White guilt doesn't get us anywhere. That's true. Action is required. Feeling like, oh, I feel so guilty. It's people who cannot comprehend that. These are people who can't comprehend white privilege. I guess that's what it is. They think, I was not a slave owner. My people weren't even in this country when slavery was in America. That's true of my family. Why would I feel guilt? Well, because the way our country works is I, fair relatively of skin, have known a reality of living in this country that anyone black of skin does not know. It is not the same experience. And there is no doubt that the easier road is to have the lighter skin. I don't know. I don't read Kelly because when I read the column, I actually had trouble following it. It just seemed like a jumble of stupidity. I couldn't follow from this to that to that to this. We're supposed to feel it's okay because what? Because the Greeks treated their slaves worse? The Romans were not as nice to their slaves as we were? First of all, the statement, you can't even make the statement. We're talking about a human being owning another human being. We're talking about a human being considering another human being their property, and a country with laws that acknowledged and recognized that. I can't. Now, one of the letter writers today says possibly, Kelly is blinded by his white privilege. It's not a matter of being blinded by white privilege. They don't understand, people like Kelly are unwilling to acknowledge that such a thing exists. Unwilling to acknowledge that such a thing exists. This letter writer is calling for Jack Kelly to be fired. I have seen other columns that are suggesting the same. We have in the last, about 5 months, seen 2 columns by 2 people employed at the Post-Gazette that were so appalling. I'm trying to remember that. What was the nature of the other one? The woman? Oh, it was this hate-filled thing about Bruce Jenner, Caitlyn Jenner. It was breathtakingly appalling. So here is a newspaper getting smaller every day in more ways than one that actually is thought to be Pittsburgh's liberal newspaper. Okay, let's right now disabuse ourselves of that. The Post-Gazette is not in any way, shape, or form a liberal newspaper. Not. I'm trying to think of the liberal columnists that it employs. So we know they have two really conservative, Jack and Kelly, and this woman, Graham, I think her name is. Who is the only real liberal columnist I can think of that is employed at the Post-Gazette is also an African American, and that is Tony Norman. Brian O'Neill, whose politics may be liberal, I don't know, does not really write a political column. He's much more journalistically inclined, and he's marvelous. But I don't see his column as political. Nor do I see Reg Henry's as political, nor do I see... So here's a liberal newspaper with one, unless I'm forgetting somebody here, one liberal columnist and two conservative columnists. And here's the reality of that liberal newspaper. It is run by a very rich family, the Blocks. The Blocks also own the Toledo Blade. Those two, and Jack Kelly's wondrous work appears so that the people of Toledo can enjoy it as well. I have little doubt that Kelly and what's her name are there by virtue of the fact that the publisher, John Block, is no liberal. He is no liberal. And I think he, more than his father before him, who was much loved there, and might in fact have been sort of liberal in that sort of Republican liberal manner. But the son is not. And I think it's his newspaper. And obviously when he wants someone employed, they're employed. When he wants certain points of view out there, he wants certain points of view. But let us stop calling the Post-Gazette the liberal newspaper. This is the newspaper that endorsed Corbett for governor. This is the newspaper who often stuns me on its editorial pages. So let's just bury that right now. Pittsburgh, I guess, is lucky still in that we have two daily newspapers, but let's not kid ourselves. They are both relatively conservative. Now, granted, the Tribune Review's editorial policies appear to make the Post-Gazette look liberal. Everything's relative. But don't kid yourself. Jack Kelly will not be fired. Jack Kelly, in this column he wrote, is saying what a lot of Americans think. And I don't know what David Shribman, the editor, would say as to why they thought that column was worthy. I don't know if it got up to Shribman's level, but it certainly got to Tom Wasilewski, whose name I'm not ever sure how to pronounce. And it is he who is the editorial page editor, and it is he who okayed that noxious, hateful article written by, what's her name? And obviously okayed Jack Kelly. So in many ways, I think when people are enraged by this kind of thing, to target the columnist is not really the right thing. You target the editorial page editor who thought that Jack Kelly's column and that woman's hateful column were wonderful additions to his territory, 2 pages in each paper. I want to thank both Natalie Watson of Monroeville and Gail Rogers for not just having their Sundays ruined, but for sitting down and writing their letters to the Post-Gazette so that others who maybe had read it, who had thought, what the, could see that they were hardly alone in their reaction to this despicable. Gail Rogers writes, would Mr. Kelly volunteer himself to be enslaved today in the hope that if he survives to reach his destination, then survives decades of brutalization, then has children who are not taken away from him and survive their own gruesome conditions of enslavement and so on, that one day, after a couple of centuries, the country that enslaved him and his descendants will be forced by war to end slavery, and then after another century or so of lynchings, of riotous destruction and legalized discrimination, and I will add terror, and legalized terror, perhaps his descendants will think themselves better off for the experience. I was thinking the other day of a woman who I know who is the daughter of Holocaust survivors, the only child of Holocaust survivors who died both young, orphaning her at a very young age. They had no other family. They'd all been wiped out. And I was thinking of her and how, as much as I want to empathize, I cannot comprehend what it would be like to make your way through this world with no family behind you, no sense of, the only 2 people who knew where she came from are gone, and all the rest of them gone as well. To be like cut off from your beginnings, from your culture, from your history. And that is what happened to every single man, woman, and child who was taken forcefully, transported brutally, and then sold as property. They not only had that horror, but they had the horror of their everyday existence. They had the horror of seeing their children taken from them and sold to others. The horror of the terror they lived with. And Jack Kelly, this white guy, has the gall to say that their great-great-great-grandchildren should be grateful that they would be much worse off if they had stayed in place, surrounded by family, community, culture, and history, knowing it, being a part of it. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I just don't know what else to say. I don't think there's any way to change Jack Kelly's mind or his perceptions. I think there are a lot of people who need to feel that their hands are clean. I did not own slaves. I would not own slaves. But do you know how much I benefited? Because there were slaves? This country was built by their labor. White people's wealth, not just in the South, but also up here in the North, was built often in large part on the scarred backs of those slaves. They got no compensation for that labor. The United States of America did. And the white folks living in it, many did. Unbelievable. Someone writing is saying you are utterly articulate in your outrage. I don't think I am, but thank you. Really don't think I am. I mean, if I could sit down, here's the problem of being a yapper. Everything is, it's just whatever is in my head at the moment. It's not thought out. I'm on my, if I were to have sat down last night and written out my feelings, it would be more articulate, without a doubt. I mean, it wouldn't be here, there, and all over the place. But I don't engage in print. That Jack Kelly, though, could sit down and write what he wrote. Because when you're writing, you have time. You go back and look at a sentence you wrote, and you have time to change a word or to say, well, that's not really what I meant to say. And he might have done that. Who knows what the first draft might have been? He might have toned this down. And maybe his editor, Tom Wesluski, no, nothing against the Polish names. I just don't know how to pronounce it. Maybe he did red pencil a few totally incendiary remarks out. I don't know. But that you have the luxury of being able to think, to edit when you're writing. I don't have this luxury. I'm just... And I would be more articulate if I were writing about it, but thank you very much. The emailer says, my question is, how can a newspaper that serves this metropolitan area with so many African Americans and a wide range of ethnicities get away with printing this garbage? Let's picket the PG. I'm serious. How can they get away with it? Well, because it's their newspaper. And you don't have to buy it. You don't have to access it. The way to get at a newspaper is not to picket them, it's to picket their advertisers. I don't know if I would be behind trying to shut down a newspaper since they are still precious artifacts, I guess, and I'm a big fan of newspapers. But in the course of my career, I have been targeted by outraged listeners on certain issues who have, in a very organized way, gone after my advertisers. And letting them know that as long as they continue to advertise on my show, they would not themselves be shopping in their store. And that scared me. I mean, at the time, that really did. And this was Catholics who were on me, because I'd had a lot of fun one day making fun of the little Catholic high school girls that I saw sitting around on the steps at the Carnegie when the boys got out of Central and they got out of theirs, and they would meet up there. And the girls' skirts would be like, rolled up to the point where you couldn't even... And I was remembering the Frank Zappa song, Catholic Girls. So I was singing that and talking about, the Catholic girls at the CYO, Catholic girls. What? And I was having some fun, and all hell broke loose. The bishop at the time, I think it was Bishop Wuerl, now the cardinal in Washington. He, under his thing, there was an editorial in the Catholic weekly newspaper, just ripping me to shreds for being anti-Catholic, which I am not. They went after that guy who heads his name is Donahue, who's national, who's always an outraged Catholic. He came after me. And when those guys come after you, they are serious. Let me tell you, they could not make my puny little radio station get rid of me. They could not, not one advertiser bowed. They got scared. They got nervous. But 201, and I, to this day, thank them, stuck with me. It's very hard when you're angered by something in a newspaper, on the radio, or on television to get any kind of satisfaction. So I don't know what to say. I think letting them know, I think these two women who wrote their letters did the right thing. And I think letters need to be sent, and somehow Tom, the editor, needs to be called out and needs to explain why he thinks this was a reasonable use of the disappearing space available in his newspaper. I mean, this newspaper used to be, big. It's like the front section now is about 6-8 pages at the most, right? And it even shrunk in size. So there's nowhere near as much in here. They don't have what's called a news hole, the other stuff being filled by ads. They have such a small little news hole now that to allow a whole column to be used for that level of blind stupidity and white privilege is mind-boggling. It is. But I don't know how you want to picket the building, go ahead. They moved. They're not where you think they are. They used to be over in that ugly building at Gateway Center that you see when you... and they've moved over somewhere, just a few floors on some building in the north side. Because they don't require the space they used to have, since they don't have half the employees they used to have. Got a few old veterans hanging on, including the columnists. And you will note that most of the bylines you see are people whose names you really don't know. They've bought their reporters out. In general, it's sad. But that Jack Kelly, that space is made for Jack Kelly is mind-boggling. It is mind-boggling. Well, speaking of Tony Norman, he did a post on Twitter that I found somewhat interesting, and it's so much lighter than what we're talking about. But Tony Norman saw that Jimmy Carter, when he was president, he used the presidential privilege to watch movies. He was constantly watching movies in the White House. And there's actually a list. Somebody has gone through, gleaned all of the Carter's, what he did on every day of his presidency, because this is noted, that finally at 8 p.m. after dinner, he and Rosalind would sit down and watch a movie. A lot. And it's sort of interesting. So here you have the president, and sometimes he was seeing movies at the very moment they're released, and sometimes he's back doing. It says right here that he watched Star Wars on February 4th, 1978, at Camp David with Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt. And that was part of how he cajoled and worked what became the historic Camp David Accords. So you can imagine Anwar Sadat, soon to be assassinated by virtue of having signed those accords, sitting with Jimmy Carter watching Star Wars. You don't know. I mean, okay, let me look. I've got the list here. Do you care about this? It's sort of interesting. The first movie he saw when he was sworn into office and was the president, he watched on January 22nd. That would be 2 days after he became president of the United States. He's watching a movie in the movie theater at the White House. And you know what he watched? All the President's Men. The next week, after being president for a week, understandably, he watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'm sure he could definitely relate. So first he watches the movie about Nixon's abuse of the office he had. And then he watches a movie about being in a loony bin. Just 2 weeks later, he watches Network, which I think is one of the greatest movies ever made about media and television. And the manipulative aspects of it. In 1976, when he watched this, in 77, when he watched this, it was a lesson Americans in large part still had not known. Okay, so after Network, there's Rocky, and then a few days later, The Godfather. Good God. The next one is The Magic Christian. You ever heard of that? Not. There was one where they said he watched a pretty racy movie, and then the next day watched a very Christian movie with. So you can see sometimes there might have been some tension in the movies he was watching, and maybe I don't know. There were some good movies then, but they weren't all new. Like, you watched Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which had been out for about 7-8 years. Harry and Tonto, Nashville, Chinatown, Blazing Saddles. And this is the order in which they were watched. Lucky Lady, The Island of Allah, and Herbie Rides Again? You've got to be kidding me. The French Connection, ladies and gentlemen. Rocky, The Caine Mutiny, Camelot, MacArthur, Jaws, The Music Man, Bridge Over the River Kwai, followed by Smokey and the Bandit. Sounder, Citizen Kane, Treasure of the Sierra Madre, The Hustler, The Lincoln Conspiracy. On and on and on. My God. Though I'm still in his first year. Black and White in Color, The Turning Point, Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, Goodbye Columbus, Funny Girl, New York, New York, The Maltese Falcon, Live and Let Die, Midnight Cowboy. And then in 1978, he even saw more. Oh my God! This list goes on forever. That was in 78? Shit. And he was like a workaholic. Well, when the hell did he have time to do this? Oh, Jimmy, I am shocked at the first movie for 78. This man who admitted to lusting in his heart. He chose love in the afternoon. And the next day, I guess, because he was feeling like maybe he had done something wrong, he watched The Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings. I can't even imagine what that is. Then there's The Graduate and Roman Holiday and Best Years of Our Lives and Semi-Tough and Sabrina and King Kong. Star Wars, It's a Wonderful Life. Papillon, Citizens Band, Jeremiah Johnson, Wait Until Dark, The Big Sleep, High Anxiety Airport, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, The 12 Chairs, Unconquered, The Guns of Navarone, Gray Lady Down, Kid Galahad, She Done Him Wrong, Mae West. Reap the Wild Wind, The Roaring Twenties, South Pacific, A Touch of Class, Cactus Flower, The World's Greatest Lover, Horse Feathers, Georgie Girl, Annie Hall. Jeez. In Harm's Way, For Pete's Sake, Come Back Little Sheba, Operation Petticoat, The Apartment, Born Yesterday, Gunfight at the OK Corral, 1, 2, 3, Key Largo, Bend to the River, Dial M for Murder, Patton, To Kill a Mockingbird, Life with Father, Cool Hand Luke, Gunga Din, Cowboy, President's Lady, Life of Emile Zola, Red River, To Have and Have Not. Good God! To Catch a Thief, Peter and Tilly, Cheap Detective, Arsenic and Old Lace, From Here to Eternity. Heaven Can Wait, Casey's Shadow, Marty, West Side Story, Diamonds Are Forever, Hooper, Charge of the Light Brigade, Magnificent Yankee, Hang 'em High, Shane, Sleuth, My Darling Clementine, Save the Tiger, Jays, The Candidate, Mildred Pierce, Paint Your Wagon, The Mouse That Roared, Coming Home, Garden of Evil, Boys from Brazil, Johnny Belinda, A Wedding, Yankee Doodle Dandy, Days of Heaven, From Russia with Love, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Mrs. Miniver, one of my favorites, Wilson, The Cat from Outer Space. You're kidding. Lawrence of Arabia, Animal House, The Last Hurrah, Lost Horizon, Dodge City, Children of Sanchez, Separate Tables, Dangerous, Hunchback of Notre Dame, Force 10 from Navarone, Elmer Gantry, Northwest Mounted Police, East of Eden, Superman, 1,000 Clowns, and A Streetcar Named Desire. Jeez! Jimmy! I mean, I find that, I just find that amazing. If you were to make a list of all the movies, I might have a list that long, because I watch a lot on, but I'm not the president! Isn't that something? I won't bore you with the next 2 years. Suffice to say. Okay, the last movie he saw in the White House. Let's see that one. Huh? Fool's Parade. I don't know the movie. But that's after he's been defeated. Actually, let's look at what he watched after the defeat in November. So here would be everything I don't know exactly when Election Day was in 1980. November, be like somewhere up there. So this is what he watched once he knew he wouldn't be able to watch all these movies for free anymore. I think it'd be like right after Airplane. You need a laugh. A Change of Seasons. Many Rivers to Cross. They all sound like this is after he's defeated. It's My Turn. The Blues Brothers. Yeah. 9 to 5. Any Which Way You Can. Still Crazy. Irma La Deuce. It Seems Like Old Times. The Competition. Private Benjamin. The Formula, and 2 Rode Together, and then 3 in 1981 when he left and Reagan came in. His last 3 were The Owl and the Pussycat, Popeye, and Fool's Parade. For what it's worth. It's actually some really good movies. Oh, and here a commenter is saying, the movie I find the most shocking is The Magic Christian. Because it says the movie is somewhat notorious. It's with Peter Sellers and Ringo Starr. Uh-huh. So it's not like some super religious movie, not with those two. Peter Sellers and Ringo Starr? The Magic Christian? And John Cleese? There are some movies on the list which he watched twice, and one of them is 10 with Bo Derek. I mean, he lusted in his heart. He also watched Kramer v. Kramer twice, Lost Horizon twice, Manhattan twice, Rocky twice. So it's an interesting list. It really is. Okay, that's it. But thank you, Tony Norman, because I sort of had fun with that. Ed says of Network, I agree with you on Network. It's still my top American film. It's a doozy. And I know that I was in television when it came out. And I know that a lot of people watching it thought it was sort of a they didn't take it seriously. They thought it was so over the top, it was really funny. And I kept saying to anybody who would listen, this is like a documentary as far as it's like a documentary. I kid you not. This is definitely it's like pulling the curtain on The Wizard of Oz. There it was. Brilliant movie. And Colette writes, don't forget Amy Carter lived in the White House too, and she was just a little girl. Well, heading into teenagehood, wasn't she? Maybe Herbie the Love Bug was for her. Yeah, probably. Okay. That's a good point. Good point. And what's the other thing I had that I wanted to talk to you about? Do you see this poor kid in Texas? He's of Arab descent. His name is Ahmed Mohammed. He's 14 years old. Good student. Ninth grader at MacArthur High. He just loves building things. He was arrested at the school on Monday, taken out in handcuffs. You know what his crime was? He excitedly had brought to school this satchel with a clock and also a circuit board and digital display and all this kind of stuff. And it had a hologram on it. And he was so proud of it because he had made this clock. He brought it to his engineering teacher Monday morning. You know, look, Mr. So-and-so, look what I did. And according to this article from the Dallas News, the teacher said, I wouldn't show this to any other teachers. That's what he said. Okay, we've got a caller. Hello?
Hey, Lynn.
Yeah.
Just want to reiterate one thing you just mentioned, that anybody in your audience that hasn't seen the movie Network, you have to see it.
Yes.
It's
brilliant.
It's beyond belief.
Well,
it's one of my top. It's the top 10 movie of all time.
yeah, it is up there. It is really great.
You know, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, okay, I agree with you. See Network. Thank you very much.
Go see it.
So this poor kid, and he's told don't show it to any other teachers, but later in his English class, he's still carrying around the satchel. Later in his English class, the clock's alarm beeped. The teacher asked us, what was that? And she said, this looks like a bomb. And Ahmed said to her, it doesn't look like a bomb to me. School called the cops. The principal and officer pulled him out of class. He was questioned, taken away in handcuffs to a juvenile detention center. He was fingerprinted. The clock is still being held as evidence. He was suspended for 3 days because the principal said he brought a hoax bomb. Unbelievable. In a letter addressed to parents, Principal Daniel Cummings wrote that the police responded to a suspicious-looking item on campus yesterday. He assured parents that even though the item did not pose a threat, the school will always take necessary steps to keep your children safe. He never mentioned in the article that the item was a homemade digital clock. The letter went on to say, I recommend using this opportunity to talk with your child about the student code of conduct, and specifically not bringing items to school that are prohibited. Who knew it's prohibited to bring proudly to your school a clock you built? Also, said the principal, this is a good time to remind your child how important it is to immediately report any suspicious items and or suspicious behavior. What kind of a world are these kids? What kind of a world is this we're bringing these kids up in? Beyond belief. As far as I know, this kid is still suspended. That's what you get, kid. That's what he gets for being a good student, proud of something he'd done at home, brings it to school, and ends up in handcuffs. Beth writes, in regard to Carter's movies. You have to remember that that was a privilege of the presidency at that time. Oh, sure, because there were no VHS or beta copies. You had to have access to what she calls the answer prints from the studios. Beth works in the business. Also, I remember that story about him and Sadat at Camp David. Prime Minister Begin would not come out of his house on the property, so Carter thought he would have this movie, Star Wars, although she has Start Wars. Is that what he thought it was? Bring them both together without having to talk, but at least to get them in the same room, which at that point he was unable to do. And she adds, Carter will go down in history as a good president, but as an extraordinary human being. I don't know if he'll go down as a good president. I mean, he doesn't deserve the general contempt that he receives. There is no doubt about that. And yeah, there are very few post-presidencies more laudable than his. There was a piece in the New York Times. I just want to end on this. There was a piece in the New York Times, maybe it was 2 Sundays ago or something, and it was written by a doctor whose teenage daughter became very, very ill and was in critical care in a hospital. And he sat there at his daughter's bedside and watched what he called one incompetent move after another by the staff, or just he would call and say, we need this immediately. Her pulse has dropped to blah, blah, blah. She needs more saline, blah, blah. And the nurse would come in and say, no, the resident on staff says we need him, no. And this guy went so insane that he actually, grabbed a crash cart, with all this stuff on it, and ran it into his daughter's room, started doing all this stuff by himself, hooking up IVs, blah, 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 blah. He may well have saved her life. He writes an article about this is a good hospital, too, by the way, because he wouldn't take his daughter to a bad hospital. And as I read the article, I had my own experiences in a number of hospitals last year. And I have to tell you, my experience dovetails with this guy's story, except I didn't have a relative who was a doctor sitting at my bed. I felt like somebody who might not make it out alive. And after the fact, I was in fact told by the surgeon that I easily could have died. And I was not being treated like somebody that ill. I knew something was terribly wrong. Nobody was attending to me. Lackadaisical would not begin to. And because I went nuts afterwards. And I have said to my son, I don't care what it is, I am never going into a hospital again. I think they are the most frightening places a person can be. For me, they are. That haunted house, Celine, you're going to go into, small potatoes. Spend 5-6 days in a hospital. And then someone wrote a letter to the New York Times about this article. And she said in it what I was thinking. She said, I'm wondering why Dr. Shaw wrote that article. How does it help the rest of us? All it is a tale of his own educated determination to save a member of his family in a hospital. Well, good for him. However, he had an enormous advantage over the rest of us who know, perhaps, that our loved ones are not being monitored very carefully, but are without the knowledge and the means to make things different. I agree. And another writer, she's a nurse, she writes this: his story underscores what many people don't know. And get this, get it into your head and know that I'm right when I say they're the most dangerous places you can be in. Preventable hospital medical errors are the third leading cause of death in this country. Preventable hospitals kill. Oh, yeah, I know. They save, too. Yeah, they save. They save lives. Mm-hmm. But did you know they're the third leading cause of death in this country? After heart disease and cancer. We're all suitably terrified of heart disease and cancer, but we are not fearful of the hospital. We actually, especially those who haven't spent much time in one, actually think that once we get to a hospital, we're safe. I'm telling you, that's when the danger really begins. And this clinical nurse specialist ends her letter by saying this: to anyone who enters a hospital, I say, beware. And Melanie writes, did you see about the mold issue in the intensive care unit at Presby? She said, I thought of you. Yeah, did you see that? Intensive care unit. God, a surgeon happens to see mold like growing on an open wound on one of his patients. They end up, putting a pickaxe in the wall of the intensive care unit. There's mold all over the place. This is the great UPMC. Hospitals are filthy. I don't even know. Yes, the mold issue. I saw it. I thought of me too. I saw that and I thought, oh my God, you would think if you were in the ICU, even though the places I was in were dirty, the rooms were dirty, if you were in the ICU, you figure those places are pristine. May you stay, and those you love, may they stay out of the hospital. If you ever have a choice, it's no to the hospital. No. If you ever have an elective surgery, no. Please, I'm telling you. They almost killed me. Seriously, almost killed me. Jeez. Okay? I do not want to see you in the hospital, okay? Go Bucks. And talk at you tomorrow.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.